Okay, so this is part three of the research presentation. And the last two, we talked about why you should do research, forming a research question, developing keywords, and some general types of sources. So now we're going to start talking about actually approaching research. So as a general rule, when you're finding this big pile of research, it's best to start by skimming, not reading. So you want to look at abstracts, which are generally about a paragraph, no more than a page. It's kind of a summary proposal of the article that you're about to read. It's meant to convince you to read further. Read the first and last paragraph of an article, or the introduction and conclusion in a book. Read the first and last sentence of each paragraph if you think that it's something you might use, and then go in more depth if needed. And that way you're not spending a ton of time reading a 30-page article that you don't need. You're figuring out what you need to do, and then you're able to spend more time on the parts that you will actually use or that are interesting to you. You also want to evaluate your sources as you're skimming and reading for accuracy, meaning that the information is not biased, for validity, which means that it's factually valid, and reliability. So sources with a history of presenting accurate information. So if you're looking at somewhere that has a history of not presenting accurate information, then it's automatically going to call into question the information that you're citing, even if that information is valid. So you kind of want to think about those things as you're approaching research. So some criteria for assessing reliability: you want to look at authority. This is the same as ethos. What's the expertise of the author? What's the reputation of the publishing organization? Objectivity, which is the degree to which the source is slanted or biased. Ideally, in general, the less biased, the better. Currency does not mean money here. It means how very current is it. So how recent is the information? In general, more recent is better in most fields, especially the sciences. It's a little different in literature. Sometimes you can have a really, really good source published in the 1800s or 1900s on a piece of literature because the literature hasn't changed. But most fields, you really want something in the last 5 to 10 years. And relevance. The information should be relevant and appropriate for your paper or your speech. So we talked about primary and secondary research before, so I wanted to very quickly go over some types of primary research, even though you likely won't be doing it. So some types of primary research would be fieldwork observations, surveys, interviews, original artifact or document examinations. So that would be like if I went to some unpublished manuscripts in a library in Oxford that were not published, but were written in the 1600s that hadn't really been analyzed before. That would be original artifact examinations. You also could apply that to writing a literary analysis because you are doing an original document examination as well, and experiments. So we also want to talk about some types of information in sources. And these apply to all the different kinds of sources that we talked about earlier, but they might apply in different levels. So factual statements, these are just facts. These are data, statistics, and often examples. Expert opinions are, well, expert opinions. They're information provided by an additional source that has theoretically more knowledge or expertise in the field than the writer does, or to support the writer's expertise and knowledge. Elaborations refer to anecdotes, narratives, comparisons and contrasts, or quotations. These are additional information that you use to support an example or point and kind of illustrate it to make it more appealing or to make it more effective. Statistics are numerical facts that can be verified. To use statistics effectively, you want to make sure that they are verifiable, which means repeated in other reputable sources and recent. So a statistic on smoking from the 1950s is probably not going to be the most useful information if you're talking about trends of smoking in teenagers today, right? So you want it to be as recent as possible. Some additional tips: use factual statements sparingly because overloading readers with a lot of numbers can be confusing. You want to choose the best ones. And it's a good idea to make comparisons. So if you do include several pieces of data, Analyze it and compare it to show why it's important. And always, as in anything, be aware of potential bias. Even seemingly objective data can be biased. So factual statements, like examples and expert opinions. So examples are specific instances that illustrate a general factual statement and provide more concrete details that make facts or statistics more meaningful. An expert opinion is an opinion by an expert, who is a person who has mastered a subject through study or experience. These can be interpretations or judgments made by an expert, or explanations of facts that put them into perspective. So elaborations, we use these to add details to factual statements, to make them more interesting and to make them more memorable, and they also allow you to put data in context. Anecdotes and narratives, these are both very similar, but anecdotes are short, often amusing stories. An anecdote's probably only going to be a couple sentences long. A narrative is a first-person account of personal experience or a tale, and they can be a little bit longer. It's when you're telling a whole story rather than just a snippet, and they're normally more serious than anecdotes, which are often, kind of amusing or funny. Comparisons and contrasts, we talked a bit about these in the module for compare and contrast. So comparison is showing how two or more things are alike. Contrast is showing how two or more things are different. And these both allow you to highlight significant aspects of data and put information in context. More elaborations, quotations, paraphrase, and summary. We talked about these with rhetorical analysis, but quotations are information that is quoted word for word from another source. A paraphrase is rephrasing a quotation in your own words, and a summary is summarizing the main points or purpose of a work. So this is word for word how it appears. This is kind of rephrasing. This is recapping like a book, like a large amount of information, or the purpose of an article. You do need to make sure you cite your sources carefully. It's a lot of S's with all three of these. Otherwise, it is considered plagiarism. You need to do that with in-text citations and a works cited page. Be careful about the length of your quotes, because lengthy quotes can be difficult to follow. So you want to choose the most important parts and use them sparingly, or paraphrase or summarize if they're very long quotes. So some tips for recording sources are to write them down as you find them. Sometimes online sources disappear. It might be difficult to find your original source. I wrote my graduate thesis over a period of about almost 4 years. And it changed a lot in those 4 years. I started it my junior year in college. So I was about 2 years ahead when I started grad school. Well, I didn't write down all my sources. I didn't put them in a works cited page. I just kind of, did a reference in a text citation. So then I get to making my bib, my annotated bibliography, my works cited page for the final thesis. And one of the sources that was really important has disappeared. It was a scholarly journal that was online. Can't find it now. So I had to rewrite that entire part of my thesis that involved that source, so that it didn't include a source that I didn't have access to, because I couldn't find the information to write down on the works cited page. Moral of the story, write things down as you find them, so you don't end up like me and having to rewrite 10 pages because you made a stupid mistake. It's a really good idea to keep a research journal. So a research journal is a place where you write down your research questions, keywords, any main takeaways, quotes, anything like this. That some people use a physical paper journal, like book, like a notebook. Some people use like a program like OneNote. Some people use index cards. Some people write in like just a little bulleted list that they keep in the back of some books. That's not as effective because it's disorganized, but anything that helps you organize the research you found and might use is really useful for you. Research cards this is the alternative to doing a research journal, is to write the main idea quotes on one side of an index card and then write the source and any information needed for the reference page on the other. And so that makes it really handy. It's useful if you're only using like one quote. If you're using 20 or 30 quotes from like a book, it's a little more tedious to do that. You can also create an annotated bibliography. So you'll write out the bibliographic information. This is the works cited entry, and then write a sentence or two summary and a sentence or two about how you plan to use the source. A lot of teachers do require these. I've never found them to be particularly helpful, but some people swear by them, so it is something that you might do. So when you're citing sources, remember to cite them in the paper itself by introducing your quotes, such as according to so-and-so and such and such, to cite your sources with parenthetical citations per MLA, and include a reference or works cited page. In MLA, it would be a works cited page. In APA, if you're in like social sciences, then you'll use a reference page. And I think that's it for the research presentation. I may do just one more real quick, just kind of showing you how to use the research databases, and then that should be it for this unit.